Good afternoon. My name is Megan Ihnen, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Hopkins at Home webinar as moderator for today's conversation entitled #I Voted, Music and Civic Duty. Today's webinar will focus on #I Voted, an organization that produces record-breaking events and activates entertainment venues to admit fans who show a selfie either from outside their polling place or at home with a blank and unmarked ballot. #I Voted events have featured Billie Eilish, Run the Jewels, Phish, Steph Curry, and more. With a C-suite that's majority BIPOC and 100% women, and an overall team that is 92% BIPOC, women, non-binary, or LGBTQ+, #I Voted is revolutionizing voter turnout while mentoring the next generation of leaders. In this important election year, learn what strategies are in play to continue to engage diverse audiences, blend music and civic responsibility, and make the act of voting a celebrated and communal experience. Before we begin, I want to thank our online viewers for joining us today. I really encourage you to ask questions through the Hopkins at Home Watch Now chat. We will address as many questions as we can during the Q&A portion in the final segment of the live stream. A few words about myself before we get going. I'm a 2009 graduate of the Peabody Institute, a mezzo-soprano, dedicated champion for composers, and a sought-after coach for musicians and composers alike. I'm the executive director of the Live Music Project, a faculty member for the Peabody Launchpad Breakthrough Curriculum, and have proudly performed on stages around the United States and beyond. I am a voting member of the Recording Academy, and finally, I've been a recipient of the Phyllis Brynjolfsson Award for Commitment to and Performance of 20th and 21st Century Music, as well as a Maryland State Arts Council Individual Artist Award in Classical Music. It's now my pleasure to introduce Emily White. Emily is an Amazon #1 best-selling author of How to Build a Sustainable Music Career and Collect All Revenue Streams, and hosts the #1 music business podcast globally of the same name. She's also a founding partner at Collective Entertainment in New York City and has proudly served on the boards of the Well Done Foundation, Future of Music, Hash Music, South by Southwest, and the David Lynch Foundation Live. She has additionally served on the Grammys Education Committee and Pandora's Artist Advisory Council. She was named to Billboard Magazine's 2020 Women in Music Executives of the Year list. Emily is also a 2024 Visiting Fellow at JHU's SNF Agora Institute. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so looking forward to discussing your work following your presentation. And I will hand it over to you and take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Megan. Thanks to everyone who's here, watching, etc. So I'm going to share a little bit about our work at I Voted, what we've done, what we're doing, what we did with our fellowship project. And I say our because you'll see in here it's a team. And I only presented that fellowship project probably a week or two ago, and it's already evolved into the field. I don't even think I've shared like a lot of this stuff publicly yet. So let's go. Let's do this. So as Megan kindly said, my name's Emily White. I have this successful book and podcast, and I share that because I've worked all over the music industry, and I have a unique perspective on the music industry as an ecosystem. And I have relationships with all the stakeholders and understand how they interact and how they intersect, which I'm now applying to voting, but I'll get to that part a little bit later. So I'm originally from Wisconsin. I live in New York City now. But for example, the 2016 presidential election was decided in my home state of Wisconsin by 22,000 votes and change. It was decided next door in Michigan that year by 10,000 votes and change. I've since learned, for example, that Al Franken was elected to the Senate by 312 votes. And, I was like, back to Wisconsin, I was like, 22,000 is our basketball arena, like I'd read that voter turnout was down. So I was like, well, why don't we fill it and tie in voting? And then I learned about like Al Franken. I mean, that's the size of a club. Michigan, that's the size of a hockey arena. So we launched for the 2018 election. It was just myself and an intern. And we activated over 150 concert venues in 37 states to let fans in on election night who showed a selfie from outside their polling place. And it was just an idea that spread. And the way we were able to scale that without getting too into it is that institutional knowledge of the music industry that I mentioned previously. So we have really an incredible board of music industry leaders, civic leaders. Kevin Lyman on here is the founder of the Warped Tour, for example. Amici manages Run the Jewels. But we also have folks like Sam Novi, who was a visiting fellow at SNF Agora Institute last year and lives in Baltimore. John Gruber, who's a tenured economist at MIT. So we really have this amazing dream team leading the charge. So as Megan kindly mentioned, we activate concert venues to let fans in on election night who show a selfie from outside their polling place or at home with a blank and unmarked ballot. If there's any electoral attorneys out there, we engage future voters by letting us know what election they will be 18 for and why they're excited to vote. And non-citizens and those ineligible to vote enter our events by letting us know which artists they're most excited to check out. That ensures our events are both inclusive and that it's in compliance with local and national electoral laws. So Professor Gruber kindly analyzed our work, showing that I voted concerts increased turnout by 7%. That is not a randomized controlled trial. That's going to be coming soon. But this analysis is available on our website. And how do we do that? So a little bit, more background on what we've done. So we started in 2018, like I mentioned. I was holding arenas in key cities for election night 2020, when obviously the pandemic hit. We pivoted and produced the largest digital concert in history. And that one we had, I think I probably said Billie on the first one, but like 2018, we had Billie at that too. But 2018, for example, we had Maggie Rogers, Living Color, My Morning Jacket. 2020, for example, that's when Billie was a lot bigger. We had Billie, Run the Jewels, Phish, a lot of the artists Megan mentioned. We've done different, I voted early sweepstakes. That was also kind of, coming out of the pandemic. Over 1,000 artists have participated in I voted over the past 6 years. But back to this really high 7% number, because even though this is not an RCT, traditional, like get the best traditional get out the vote efforts increase voter turnout by like 0.5 to 1%. So how do we do that? I lead this incredible team of music industry professionals. And even with that, we don't sit around and guess and say, oh, well, this artist is cool, or let's get that artist. I mean, we absolutely stand on the shoulder of giants of voting and culture orgs. And that's really how it's been done primarily for the past 20 years, but even before that, right? Like dating back to the 1960s. So what we did with our 2020 webcast, and that's what the MIT analysis is of, we, instead of guessing, we book the top trending artists in these key locations whose electoral margins are often decided by the size of a concert venue. Although we are not funded, which I will get into. So I want to do this everywhere. Like I want to do this in all 57 states and territories that vote. But for now, I can really only get folks to volunteer when they're focused on these margins. And Billboard kindly pointed out that young people in the US are far more likely to attend live music events, 53% of teens and 63% of millennials, than vote. 35% of 18 to 29-year-olds vote. So we are meeting them where they already are. We've been really fortunate to get a lot of press, really grateful for the media attention we've received. So that's what we've done. And this is what we're planning for 2024. But as you'll hear, it's already expanded through the tools that we've built with Johns Hopkins, which I'll get to. But I've been working on this obviously I've been working on I voted for 7 years, but I've been working on the 2024 plan for the past year. And we've been holding over 120 of the most beloved venues in key cities and states, and taking this info back to partners, donors, anyone who will listen along with the data on the top trending artists and saying, do you want to fund these shows? Now, I'm getting a little into the concert industry weeds here. We would need $12 million to fund all these shows. I knew that was a very lofty goal. So this is a concert industry term, but as we get challenged out of some of these holds, the venues know I want to connect with the challenging agent and point out that November 5th is election night. Our shows are on election night. I don't know if I mentioned that. And the booking agents never know that it's election night. They're just routing their fall tours normally. So we point that out and say, do you want to build into your deal setting aside X amount of tickets for I voted entry? And the answer is always yes. So we should be in 120 rooms. I care way, way more about producing our own data-driven shows because that's what has the most impact. But had a great conversation with Arizona's Desert Diamond Arena today. They're actually our number one target. The civic experts on our board, give us a list of states and where we can have the most impact. I'm pretty excited about the Pfizer Forum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's what sparked this whole idea. So I'm, this is coming together, and I'm pretty pumped about it. So, well, let's go back to this for a second. So obviously we're trying to solve the problem of voter turnout, but I don't have this thing funded, right? Like for lack of a better phrase, I'm pretty good at, I'm pretty persuasive, I guess. I'm able to get, people involved to lend their time. And so when we did the 2018, when we activated 150 venues in 37 states with just myself and an intern in 2018, obviously that was so hard and incredibly exhausting. And then as I'm learning more about the nonprofit world, the response, not as crass as as I'm going to make it sound, but was like, prove it, right? So we got Professor Gruber together, my friend Talia, who's an analytic strategist. And so Professor Gruber at MIT put together that MIT analysis, but it's obviously not an RCT, which normally would be considered the gold standard. So for my fellowship project, that's what I wanted to try to solve. Like, how do we analyze this? And there's no right answer. Like, I really have like brilliant academics on my board who have been working on this for decades. But what we came up with was a different way of analyzing or projecting. So I worked with a really brilliant, I know everyone at Hopkins is brilliant, but a really brilliant Hopkins professor named Eliza O'Reilly. She's probably about my age, if I had to guess. And I know she would be okay with me saying she was 6 months pregnant when we presented the fellowship presentation a few weeks ago. So just in awe of her. She's a massive music fan. She did, believe her graduate, I know she lived in Austin before, but I believe it was her graduate degree at UT Austin. Austin's the live music capital of the world. So this was just the perfect project for a math professor / music fan. And then we assembled 3 applied math students and 1 political science student. And so what we did was really Eliza and the students, and a bunch of the students are freshmen too. And 2 of them are roommates, which was a coincidence. We only found that out the day of the presentation. So we have this data on the top trending artists in each location, and they analyzed which artists can have the deepest impact on civic engagement by analyzing their fan demographics and comparing their fan demographics by location and comparing that with the voter files by location to identify historically low turnout groups. The professor I worked with pointed this out. I did not point this out. We're the first to combine those 2 data sets. To me, I'm just like a very practical entrepreneur, but that's what it took to project, which artists can increase turnout the most. So here's a little bit of information on that Professor O'Reilly put together. Our data comes from Chartmetric, which is public. The music data comes from Chartmetric, which is publicly available information. We look at the number of Spotify monthly listeners, within each city. And then Chartmetric, I don't think this is public information, but they kindly gave us the breakdown for each artist's fan demographics based on age and race. And we got some really good questions when I first presented this about doing a deeper dive into some of these demographics. And I pointed out that's why it's so important to share this work publicly. Like, we'll be taking this to Billboard and Music Press. because that'll allow me to go back to Spotify and be like, hey, social impact person at Spotify, like, can you give us a little more granular data? Like, here's a pretty billboard piece. And then the voting data actually was probably a little more challenging for them to work with. And I'm sure a lot of the STEM folks can appreciate this. Like, it, you know, the voter files by location are available, but they're often in different file formats. So just getting that data cleaned up and organized really almost felt like the bulk of the project for the students, but they were smart enough to figure out someone had done that already. So they found some other database and figured that out. And then here's Professor O'Reilly's first analysis. So this is so interesting and helpful because I know this because I live in this data a lot. So regular people, we would call you normies, as in non-music people. It could be music people that say this to me too, though. Like, you got to get Taylor Swift, you know? But actually, when we calculate, you know, fan demographics and compare it to historically low turnout groups by location, and I've seen this for years, Drake can have a significantly higher impact, good old Canadian Drake, on civic impact and engagement in Atlanta. And so can 21 Savage. And then The Weeknd and Taylor are, you know, pretty similar. But the students kindly pointed out, like, Taylor actually has way more listeners than some of these other artists, but some of these artists actually have lower or fan bases that come from historically low turnout groups, right? So, you know, we were talking to a foundation at one point that was going to fund like 7 shows in Houston. That was like my dream budget. Our person there moved on. That's very sad. But say I have $1 million or $500,000. If I'm deciding between multiple artists, I can now project their impact on, in my world, voter turnout. But something that was really exciting about our presentation is a professor or someone asked, can this be applied to registration as well? And Professor O'Reilly, without hesitation, said yes. And that's not even what I designed it for. And so really, like, you know, what I've been focused on, you know, like when I explain like how I understand how the music industry works, and for better or for worse, like my entrepreneur brain just like solves problems. That's why I'm tired today, because my brain just like does that at night, or sometimes I, especially during election year, just wake up with just like energy flowing through me. What I've identified over the past 7 years working in voting is there's 3 problems to solve. There's registration, there's IDs, and there's turnout. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but I want to share some of the students' results here. So we had Jackson Shapiro analyze Charlotte and Detroit. We had Emmy analyze Cleveland, and Tomoya analyze Houston. So I'll just go through these fairly quickly. But again, here with, I need to move you to see something. Okay, yeah, so this is Charlotte. Again, the students pointed out here that Drake, 21 Savage, definitely no one wants to deal with Kanye. But like are bigger than, not bigger, but have, can impact civic engagement that much more. So this is like so powerful. And, you know, it was really fascinating. I'm so used to this as a music industry professional and how the music industry works now, which there's like, I should have these numbers memorized, but I don't. There's like hundreds of thousands of songs released a day. There's so many artists. Everyone is in their silo. You could look up the listings for your local arena. I could look up the listings for Madison Square Garden. There's going to be tons of artists, maybe not tons, but there's going to be artists I haven't heard of, right? And so I remember Professor O'Reilly, who's a big music fan, saying, who's 21 Savage, you know? But then I don't think this artist is on here, but then one of the students said, yeah, I don't think they're on this one, but they're on one of them, who's Jelly Roll. And these are huge artists. And actually, I've known who Jelly Roll is since 2018 because the data was screaming, you know, at me. And I'll just, I'm going a little long, but there's Jelly Roll at number 2 in Cleveland. Actually, let me comment on this and then I'll give a quick anecdote. It was also pointed out, I mean, look at if we're going to generalize the genre demographics here in Cleveland. I mean, one of my fellows kind of called it bro country. Now, our data is imperfect from Spotify. I will say that. Chartmetric used to literally have the top trending artists by location, and they changed it, and that actually like even bothers our chart metric friends. So what we did was, these are artists that have these cities in their top 20, because what that means is Cleveland is outperforming larger cities. So it's not a perfect indicator, but it's pretty good. And then we use our brains on top of that. So instead, I looked at the data last summer on the top trending artists in Milwaukee, and I was like, this Noah Kahan guy is sitting pretty at a number 7, smashed in between, massive artists that sell out arenas. And then I looked at his touring history in Milwaukee, and it was like 1,000 in 2017, 2,000 2018, 3,000 2019. I'm like, this is the guy you want, because he's growing and it's what people are listening to. A week later, his tour was announced, which includes multiple sold out dates at Fenway Park, Madison Square Garden, and probably most impressive to me, Alpine Valley in Wisconsin, which is 50,000 capacity. So he jumped from 3,000 to 50,000. And not only is that not something we never would have known otherwise. I mean, people know who he is now. He plays, he's played Saturday Night Live, etc. Fun fact, I used to rip tickets and run the guest list at venues in college with his now manager. So always pay attention to your classmates and the people who are next to you. But like, anytime I would mention his name, anyone over the age of 22 would have no idea who I was talking about. Like, not even like over the age of 30. And I was presenting on this at the University of Maryland to a small group of nonprofits and donor partners. No one had heard of this guy, Noah Kahan, except for the head of the program, the head of the democracy program, who said, oh, my 19-year-old daughter and I love Noah Kahan. And it's like, exactly, right? So again, we're not sitting around just like picking and guessing. It's like, we're using our brains when we look at the data. But it's really fascinating when you dig in. So if anyone is interested in, partnering on a show, funding a show, we're also not precious about our branding. So it can absolutely be, a partner nonprofit powered by I Voted. But let me go back to the tools that we've built, because we also reverse engineered the tool. So that's what we built for I Voted. Yay. Very excited about that. But I was having high level conversations with, I probably shouldn't say public names, but like really like some of the biggest artists in the world. And then also there's smaller artists, medium-sized artists coming to us wanting to get involved. So I said to the students, like, hey, can we reverse engineer this where we could type in any artist name and it's going to determine who will increase turnout the most? And the answer was like, yeah, that's no problem. So that is almost done. I know we have finals coming up, but we are developing that tool that the industry is very excited about. I've been talking to major labels about this, who will normally load up their active artists with like a toolkit, post about registration, etc. And I said, hey, if you want to throw a targeted ad spend behind that, I can tell you exactly where they can have the most impact, right? So there's like really, like, I see two main uses for the tool that Jasmine is the name of the student who's developing that, which is obviously to determine in real life appearances. So instead of just like, cool, I'll play in Atlanta or speak in Milwaukee or whatever, like we can tell you exactly where each artist will have the most impact, but also for those targeted ad spends. We're also working on an I Voted early tour with a pretty big artist that averages about 5,000 tickets a night, where folks can enter with their selfie criteria in late October, leading into a big election night show. And, going back to my mantra of registration, ID, turnout, I mean, that is already happening. Like there is a big fancy, Alexa's talking to me. There's a big fancy founder of a tech company that we've all heard of that is very passionate about this stuff. And so, for example, I've been working with his team, who's been doing really well-researched targeted work on voter registration. So, for example, they ran an activation at J. Cole, who I know is all over our data. There's J. Cole. So they ran an activation a couple of weeks ago at J. Cole's Dreamville Festival, offering a check your registration to be entered to win a VIP suite So the voter reg org bought the suite, put a little boost behind the Instagram. They got 25% of the festival to check their registration. I mean, I have never heard numbers like that in my life. So, is this live? Are we live streaming or is this recorded? Whatever. We just confirmed another festival for that. And like, now that I'm on board for that, I'm just going to like completely put it in place, like exactly where they're targeting. But back to this situation, I said, we can also create digital campaigns for you, especially for artists that aren't touring right now, or, festivals that don't fit your demographic. So let's look at the top trending artists that can increase registration the most, and, set up activations with them, whether it's like check your registration, win a 15-minute, Zoom with one of these artists. So we're applying that to registration. And then the previous visiting fellow I mentioned, Sam Novi, connected me with Vote Riders, who have just done incredible work in the voter ID space. We just sent them a proposal to apply all these tools and data to ID. And then we're the turnout ladies. So anyone that wants to do an I Voted show, that's what we're doing. So I hope that all made sense. That went a little bit longer than what I planned. I'm just really excited that we're only a few weeks into having these tools, and the music and voting industries are really excited about them. So I really just can't thank Johns Hopkins enough, the SNF Agora Institute, Hari, Stephen, Kara, the students, Professor O'Reilly. And just for me as an entrepreneur, this project has been so gratifying, because not only for the impact that it's having and it can have, but I just love it when teams come together with different strengths. Like I didn't even try to explain that math slide to you, but they also don't know how to get that music data, right? So it was like really a beautiful combination of skills and experience. And yeah, Eliza and the students and I are going to keep going. So yeah, thanks so much for listening.
I love that. Congratulations, Emily. This is so cool. And also, it's such a testament to you and your team, both the vision and then being able to build those tools. All of those are just really important skills. And congratulations on being able to bring that to fruition. That's really, really special. So I wanted to start, obviously, I have some questions that I'm super excited, but I wanted to encourage people to put their questions in the chat. And I'm going to start by asking you this question from Cindy, and then we can kind of toggle back and forth between my questions and their questions. So Cindy asked, you mentioned that the tour managers seem excited to participate. Have you had a similar response from musical artists? Is there anybody that's super into it, right?
Yeah, great question. Not to dig in too much, but I used to be a tour manager, and tour managers run tours, but I think you're referring to managers who oversee an artist's career. People are freaking out in such a good way. So I can't share the name of the artist that's doing that I Voted early tour. But that's like the ultimate, like I'm putting together, yeah, I think I can share this. We're putting together a larger industry coalition, and I wrote a plan for them, music industry coalition, that was registration, ID, turnout. And to me, the first, the entry point is registration. So cool. Register with our partners at Headcount. If you just want to post something, great. If that's all you're able to do, like, we love you. It's all good. Someone that wants to do more, we're like, cool. Like, are you touring? Are you up for digital campaigns with Vote Riders to make sure folks have their IDs to be able to vote? Like, again, Vote Riders has just put out like really simple and alarming information on, like, pretty much half of Americans are disenfranchised because of voter ID laws. Like, it's very, very messed up. And then an artist that wants to do more, we're here, at I Voted to produce concerts, to solve the turnout piece. And yeah, like artists are just super excited. I've already met with the head of the Artist Rights Alliance. She represents like 90 artists. She's like, I have all these artists that want to do things, and like, they don't know what to do, right? And so now we've developed that like 3-step turnkey plan. So like artist organizations are excited, artist managers are excited, labels are excited, artists, beyond the Artist Rights Alliance are approaching us. So, and again, that's where it goes back to the beginning of like, not only me understanding the ecosystem, how it works and how everyone interacts, but I've been a partner at management companies for decades, so I know exactly what it's like on the other end of the inbox. And I think that's a really important piece of it as well. Like everything we try to do, and this is like really good advice for any entrepreneur. Everything we do is simple and impactful. Maybe it didn't sound simple, but on the receiving end, we try to make it as simple and impactful as possible.
I mean, it sounds so clear. I just really love, especially when you're able to illuminate here are the 3 steps, and it just allows people to jump on board with you and say, I can commit to that. This makes sense to me. With all of the other things they've got going on, they can say, I care about this and this is valuable to me. And it's easy to see it in their lives. So I can see why that makes so much sense. So one of my questions, Emily, is the I Voted initiative has employed, let's see here, data to strategically book top trending artists in states where electoral outcomes can be influenced by venue size, which you covered so beautifully. Can you share anything that surprised you about the process of using specific data metrics and algorithms to identify your influential artists? You covered some of that in there. I really loved how you pointed out specifically that there's a difference between the artists who can impact certain voting demographics. I thought that was very interesting. But was there anything else about the data or how you were using the data or the algorithms to increase voter turnout? Anything about that process that surprised you?
Yeah, great question. The first one, I think I've got this in here actually, that Professor O'Reilly kindly pointed out is, this is pretty basic. You don't have to be, she is a math genius, but you don't have to be a math genius to understand this. Many artists have way more monthly listeners than people who actually voted, right? Like I thought about it with my former tour manager brain as far as venues go, but
Yeah.
Eliza pointed that out, which is really exciting. But to answer your question, I could really talk about these data examples all day. So we have different data sets. We have the top trending artists in each location, which are national acts, but also from each location, which are local acts. So I know the music scene in Milwaukee fairly well. And so when I first downloaded the top trending artists from Milwaukee, and I see this on the national end too, the artists that I'd heard of that are like the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel's artists to watch at South by Southwest, et cetera, didn't have fans. They were way at the bottom. They're good networkers, and or they can afford a publicist, and or they can take like a, creative press shot with a piano in the river. The number one trending artist in Milwaukee for years has been a Latin hip hop group called Quinto Soul that I have never seen written about or covered or the industry getting excited about. So Quinto Soul is who you want to book.
Yeah.
Not the super trendy people that know how to network with journalists. So I've experienced that as a manager as well. And for music fans out there, like if you're a jam band fan or you're a EDM dance fan, like jam band people know this. Maybe dance people don't care. Like I'm going to use a really strong word here. Press hates those artists. But they can sell out, Red Rocks and multiple nights at Madison Square Garden. So who cares?
Absolutely.
And then I've also worked with press darlings that, are adored by the New York Times and NPR and all that. And then, can't even sell out the Mercury Lounge in New York City, which is 200 capacity. So that's why looking at the data, whether it's for, this nonprofit work or whether an artist is, looking who to set gig swaps with, gig swaps up with and start expanding their career. Like, or if you're an industry person and you're looking for artists to work with, like, check out the data because it's available to see what people are actually listening to where. Oh, well, I'll add one last thing. What people are listening to where varies incredibly. So in Milwaukee, the first time I downloaded that data, it's like all jam bands and rap. And then an hour away in Madison, which is where the University of Wisconsin is, it's like the hippest indie artists I've never heard of, but they're all really good. And then in Grand Rapids, just over the lake, I didn't know this was a thing, but it was every genre ever, but Christian. So Christian emo, Christian rap, Christian rock, obviously. And so geographically, those locations are not very far apart, but what they're listening to where drastically differs.
I think that's so interesting. Just one of my personal interests is still about, how are how do we coalesce in communities and geographic communities around music and things like that.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the data, you're still seeing, oh yeah, we are really distinctive in these qualities. So that's very cool that you get to see it from that bird's eye view. You can really see that the numbers bear out different stories and how people are connecting through music. So that's really, really interesting. I'm wondering, this question is a little bit about, our lives with digital music making, virtual music making, and then the in-person part. And I wanted to ask about, your 2020 I Voted digital concert, huge groundbreaking moment. And could you elaborate on the strategies you employed? You did a little bit of that in your presentation about planning and sustaining that same level of engagement in maybe non-COVID years, and what are the factors for you in achieving that in more and more of these in-person situations?
I it's really straightforward. I mean, this isn't really what you asked, but we were always in person.
Yeah.
We only pivoted during the pandemic, and that was a pretty natural pivot because I
Mhm.
was an artist manager for so long. And so things come up and you have to react and you have to respond, right?
Yeah.
Um, but webcasting numbers in general went down by
Mhm.
2022. And I know that anyway, but for example, like there were like 7 like big webcasting companies in 2020 because all this funding went into the space and most are out of business at this point.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think more significant is I don't have these numbers memorized, but I presented them at University of Maryland. The 2024, sorry, the 2023 concert industry made more than 2019, even if you
Wow.
take out Taylor Swift and Beyonce's tours.
Yeah.
So people have just returned in real life concerts in really record breaking numbers. So we're always going to go to where people are. Like, I want to do some webcasting things. I think there's tremendous value in that for a
Mhm.
variety of reasons. People who can't attend shows, artists who are abroad or they're off or whatever. And we really love the platform Veeps for that. So I'd love to do that. But everything is funding dependent. I mean, we do a lot of volunteering and put a lot of time in. But the more funding there is, the more people we can hire to, you know, work on the webcast portion and things like that. But it goes back to the numbers and like people have just um, come back to in real life concerts and record breaking numbers.
That's so heartening to hear. I think we can feel that sometimes anecdotally, or we can feel it in our own experience. But it's so wonderful to hear, that the data is really bearing that out, so to
Yeah,
speak. And you can see, like, oh yes, we are returning to these things. So
exactly.
this question is also about your work with the SNF Agora Institute, which your participation as a fellow is aiming to strengthen global democracy through data-driven insights. We've been talking a lot about data so far, but can you share some key findings or tools that you've developed specifically in this collaboration, and or any of that you're really excited about? It's been so cool to hear how you've been working with the students both in developing the tools and then the reverse engineering. But is there anything that you maybe didn't mention yet in your presentation that's coming out of your time as being a fellow?
I don't think so. I mean, those are the main tools, just determining which artists can increase voter turnout. I need to stop saying that. Civic impact.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
most, because
Yeah.
that's something that came out of it, right? Like I
Yeah.
was focused on turnout, but then it affects all these other things and then reverse engineering it. And so, like I said, like especially with the reverse engineer tool, to me, that influences in real life appearances and targeted digital campaigns. But I know like our head of marketing just sent me like 5 more uses for the tool. Like one thing I suggested to the executive director of the Artist Rights Alliance is like, let's just give them the tools,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like the artists know best, their managers know best, right? They know them and their fan bases better than anyone. So I only presented this, like, we only finished that like 2 weeks ago. So I think there's going to be more to come, but getting back to that simple and impactful perspective, like I just want, for now, I want to apply it to registration, ID, and turnout, and apply that to the wider music industry through this coalition that we're building, and I don't think we'll be able to do this year, but expand and replicate that in the wider entertainment industry and into sports, which has always been my vision. Show your selfie, get into an NBA game. It certainly
Yeah.
is not limited to music. That's just what I know and what I know how to do.
Yeah, I love that. I did have a question about, increasing or seeing any sectors outside of that. And so it sounds like obviously sports is one of them. Do you see this being able to branch out into any other sectors that you're particularly excited about?
I want to activate every single entertainment event that is happening on election night and during the early voting period.
Nice. Yes. You're like, I
And
want
we've
to.
actually had inquiries from Greece and Luxembourg and other democratic
Oh,
countries wanting to do I voted in their countries. So
that's so
yeah, not only is it
cool.
not limited to music, it's certainly not limited to the United States.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that. That's really, really interesting. And so wonderful to imagine that being able to like grow beyond just the United States. So really incredible. I, this one is about mentoring, and I know that you worked with students, you work with so many people that I know that you're very passionate about mentoring this next generation of leaders, and wondering if you could share kind of what drives your enthusiasm for that and how mentorship enriches, the overall impact of I voted.
I think it happens pretty naturally. I was thinking about it today, how one of my business partners just absolutely crushes it, really running collective entertainment while I'm so busy with this and my writing and podcast. And my other business partner, like, also works on I voted. And, the short answer to that is like, get your kids in sports, because I was an athlete growing up. And, that teaches you teamwork, time management, work ethic. And so I think I've been on swim teams with women my whole life. And so I'm just used to, like, when you don't win a championship with one swimmer,
Yeah.
So I'm just used to working really hard together, towards a specific goal and just having those really unique experiences. And when it comes to mentoring, I mean, really, like, I've had other executives ask me how we've built such a diverse team, and, like, we put a little bit of effort into it. I had a great COO in 2020 who pointed out we didn't have very many Black men on our team.
Hmm.
So you mentioned the Well Done Foundation, which provides paid music industry internships for underserved students. So we worked with
Yeah.
Well Done to recruit more Black men to our team, but otherwise, they all show up,
Hmm.
and they show up because, as you mentioned, our C-suite is all women, majority BIPOC. So when other
Hmm.
executives are asking me, how did you build such a diverse team? I'm really struggling to do that. I say, well, do you have diverse leaders? And
Hmm.
the answer is more often than not, no. So
Hmm.
that is actually how you create a diverse team. It's not just getting diverse interns or even entry level employees into the pipeline. It's hiring, it's promoting. And so when people see themselves reflected in leadership, they show up. But yeah, that's something I take really, really seriously. And I'm not always perfect at this, but I think as a leader, I don't think, I know as a leader, it's really, really important to find folks' strengths.
Yeah.
Like, there's a
Yeah.
million things in the world I don't know about. Um, but there's a couple things that I know a lot about. And again, this project is such a perfect example. I could never do those math calculations, but they also needed, like, my music industry experience for us to all come together and do this.
Well, and you're making me think of something I think I might mess up the title, but you have this internship manifesto,
Oh, yeah.
right? That is like that is also, and I think that that just speaks to it's clearly a long-term interest that you've had in helping people get involved in the areas that they're super interested in, but then from the very beginnings of their professional life through the kind of executive and director level, that's something that's you're really thinking about how do you get people to express their passions and their interests and identifying people's strengths. And I wasn't sure if you wanted to tie in anything about internship manifesto in this.
Yeah. Well, you're like, I mean this is a compliment. That's like the old school, like the demo first album. What you're saying is my first book is called Interning 101. And that was born out of what I called the intern manifesto for one of our companies, because you're very kind with what you just said, but it's really just me as an entrepreneur solving problems.
Yeah.
And the problem was, I was teaching a lot of basics over and over to my interns. And so I wrote this intern manifesto for one of my management companies, because I was like, well, then they can just reference this, and then they can do higher level things. And if they have questions, I'm here, but they want to do higher level things. I want them doing higher level things. And I had two really great NYU interns one summer, and I said, hey, if I turn this into like a 100-page how-to book for you and your classmates, would this be helpful? And it was like an overwhelming yes. So that's what Interning 101 is. I mentioned I'm really excited to write a 6 mini book series called The Routine, about my daily routine that I do anywhere in the world. But I'm mentioning that because after I get that done over the next few years, I want to create kind of like an Interning 101 version for book for everyone, called Modern Office Basics, keeping it all in yourself together. Because a lot of times we run into people where my business partner are like, oh, they need to read Interning 101, but they're 40 years old and we don't want to insult them. So again, thank you for what you said about Interning 101, but it really came out of solving a problem.
Well, let me know. I'll pre-order the next books like when you're ready. Emily, I have one question from Charlie in our audience, and then we're going to start wrapping things up here. So I want to make sure that we get to this one before we start to move on to the conclusion. So let's see here. Charlie was wondering, have you had any pushback to the work that you're doing? Hoping not, but that is par for the course when we're trying to do this kind of work. So wondering if you've had any pushback that you wanted to talk about.
Great question, Charlie, which I can answer so clearly because, especially with the webcast, didn't even mention that was over 400 artists. So we pitched, because we were just pitching for the data. So I have a really good gauge on this. One reason we are very successful, and I don't even think we said this, is because we are nonpartisan, bipartisan, whatever partisan, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. And so, for example, well, I will say, because again, we had like no funding in 2020. So everyone was volunteering. The artists were donating the time. We were donating. It was just everyone's donating. So the number one question we would get in pitching artists is, what is the budget? But the number two was, you're nonpartisan, bipartisan, right? Like, because they don't want to alienate any percentage of their audience, even if it's a small one. And so there was a manager of a big artist that came to me in 2020, who's a friend of mine, and he wanted to do this big campaign where artists were getting behind, like a big artist was in each state was getting behind Democratic candidates. So you have Beyonce in Texas or Bon Iver in Wisconsin. And I could see how tunnel vision he was about this. And I was like, who am I to get in the way of an entrepreneur? Like, I know that tunnel vision and I know that feeling. But I did tell him, I was like, I don't know if artists are going to get behind this because you're partisan. And he came to me a few months before the election, just looked like a completely different, just so stressed, like poor thing, just being like, artists aren't coming on board for this. So, like people love it because it's nonpartisan. I would say under 1% of the time, we might get a response like, all the parties are corporate, so I don't bother voting or blah, blah, blah. But that is really this is an unscientific answer, like under 1% fraction of the time, like just being nonpartisan, bipartisan is the way to go.
Yes, I think.
And also, for anyone who is listening, we're always interested in more students on the team. And as the music industry is requesting use of these tools, we're going to need more like hourly students that we can pay to help with this work. So I will go back to that last slide, which has our email address. So if you're interested in learning more or getting involved, join our dream team.
Awesome. That was going to be my last question too, Emily, is there, just any of the ways that we can join you in the work that we're doing? If there are any specific call outs for, sounds like students definitely getting involved. If there are professionals, that are really passionate about this, is there any way that they can also just kind of stay in touch with you? How's the best way for people to kind of make sure that they know about what's going on with I Voted?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, really like funding. So we even had a Hopkins student that I invited to join on our last board call, and she put me in touch with a potential funding person. So I don't care like who you are, who like the more of these shows we can do, the better. Like I said, we're not precious about our branding. So if it is a fellow nonprofit, if it's literally a brand, it absolutely can be nonprofit presents, powered by I Voted. Yeah, and to stay in touch, we've got an email list on our website, or if you just want to email, the email address I have on the screen, with your permission, we'll add you to the email list, and we'll keep you posted on everything we're doing.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. So as we're kind of wrapping this up, I want to just thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your wisdom. And honestly, I could talk to you for 2 more hours. So that'll have to be like on our own podcasts at some point. But I wanted to also thank our attendees for joining us. And I want to make sure that they know that all registrants receive a follow-up email with a recording of the program and a link to our upcoming event schedule. And we hope to see you at future Hopkins at Home events. And you can always find and register for any of these upcoming programs at events.jhu.edu. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Hopkins at Home. And I thank everybody for watching tonight.
Thank you, Megan. That was amazing.